the session. I would like to clarify that as it is happening with the rest of the webinars that were conducted as a SEMIC, we providing after the conduction of webinar, we are providing the recordings, the presentation of the current presentation, as well as the minutes, so that for people that were not being able to participate, all the information is available. Next slide, please. For at least for the past 12 years, the semantic interoperability community, part of the interoperability unit, has as a goal to achieve, to deliver products, assets, so that to ensure interoperability between member states, starting from the specifications, which are reusable, free to use data models, which are regularly updated, and here we focus on DCAT-AP, but there's a lot of variation of it. We are conducting pilots that are used to test specific and develop specific solution for public administration in order to scale up their interoperability maturity by focusing also on current challenges such as LDS and AI, as well as modeling support. And we are providing a knowledge hub, including training materials, guidelines, and events in order to foster interoperability and share knowledge of and sharing knowledge of its benefits. The Knowledge Hub also has the webinars as well as training material. As we said, the three main pillars of the SEMIC specification, pilot and knowledge hubs, but we are facing current challenges such as how those our assets can fit into data spaces, how semantics can be combined with artificial intelligence without neglecting important work that is done performance-based registries, the regulatory reporting, and overall supporting on implementation of information, as well as the catalog of services. And then I let the floor to my colleague Bert in order to continue with the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Welcome from me as well. I will take you to a broad picture of the topic of today. What we want to do is namely sharing data sets in an interoperable way across data spaces. And we start from a broader perspective, and then we hand over the floor to 3 testimonials, and then we can discuss and see how we can help each other. Oh, sorry, my apologies. It's clicking. So what is the objective? And as we know, there's a European strategy for data. And in this context, the objective is that we create data spaces to foster more exchange, new products, data services, and so on. And this is based on more accessible data. And this is all of what it's about today, is that we want to see how we can create more accessible data. And this, if we look from the perspective where this is of course not something entirely new, it has been an historic activity that we are continuing and strengthening. And we all know that data must be fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we built upon those principles to create and to look to the data spaces and to see how to make them interoperable in making their data sets and their data accessible. And in this process of making this data accessible, there's a lot of discussions, of course, on how to share the really physical exchange of the data, which APIs or formats of protocols to be used. As well, there's discussions on where it is stored, where you can find it, catalogs, services, data lakes, and all these kind of things, where you can store and maintain the data. And there's as well a discussion about what is actually the data about, and what we have information inside of this data. And then you have data models, data specifications. But here we'll take a bit of the abstract view and say, okay, what is the data model about a data set, an abstract information, piece of information that we want to share across data spaces. Now, today, and this is where data spaces are working on, is that they're doing their great job in creating the data in their data space interoperable. That's what they do and they focus on, and it's a good focus. But with here, we want to take one step broader and say, okay, what if we want to share data from one data space to another data space? And what are we can facilitate and what facilitation already exists? And from more specifically from the context of the CIMIC team out what we can foster here and that we can work together on. So this is our objective together, to see how we can share data from one data space to another data space. So we want to have for that interoperability across data spaces on this notion of what is a data set, etc., in order to save time and costs, to make it shareable, and to reuse this as much as possible across other data spaces so that everybody has benefits from it. And so this is our challenge, the objective that we want to do. If we make it somehow concrete, and it is always good to have some illustrative example. If you consider an agency with the maintenance of roads, it publishes road networks. If we have another agency of environment that will publish emission on dust particles, and we have an agency of health that publishes illnesses to absences. And all these agencies and these publication of these data sets happen within the context usually of one data space, sometimes in multiple, but the focus is typically, okay, in this area of my closest peers, I do my best and I share the data. But then, of course, the question comes, if you have, as a researcher or more complex, what is the impact of road-related emissions on work absence? And then you see that it easily comes that we start to combine data from different data spaces. And then the challenges arise, of course, saying, okay, I'm not so familiar as from the mobility data space with health data space, how I can find the catalogs where the data sets are available or presented in the health. How do I find it? How I can come to it? It's one of the challenges. And if I have found it, do I understand the metadata? Can I make sense of it to at least to a first level, so that I can find starting points for my question of my objective of making this new insight that I want to realize. And so in this area, we want to facilitate. And this is where our objectives are with the CIMIC team around standardizing DCAT-AP. So this means interoperability for dataset sharing means that we have to look to harmonized metadata. What is harmonization? Which level of harmonization is needed, etc. We want to do this in a long-term objective, so that it's maintained, that we can rely on to make some strong foundations. And we have an eye on that. We know that data sets are being published and shared across multiple contexts, that a publisher has only to make one kind of metadata and can do a bit of additions to make it fit for others, so that this publisher can expose his metadata as good as possible to multiple perspectives. And this means that we as well have to see and know and be aware of that there are different variations of this metadata available, and that we have to find good collaborative ways to support these variations. And that's where the solution, so we see DCAT-AP as a solution in this story, as a name for a solution, where we see DCAT-AP as an EU-wide specification for metadata descriptions about data sets and catalogs of data sets that enable the interoperability across data spaces. So we discuss here about then a common set of constraints at the level of DCAT-AP that we can share across the different data spaces. We have an eye on this, that we can describe metadata in a unified way that can be shared across the different data spaces. We have attention for how we can build and extend the specification so that it becomes appropriate for the specific data spaces, and that resulting and embedding in a long-term management of the specification, but as well of the metadata and the data sets itself. So that is the perspective, the setting where we want to bring and to discuss with you all and to see how we can aid each other on this area. And for that, of course, we want to mention that this work is, of course, not only something now we start, it's something that already existed and is continuing to exist. It is based on existing standards, so even beyond Europe. So W3C standard is a worldwide standard. So we can exchange even at a certain level with the United States or Australia. It's based on an ecosystem of implementations, which is quite mature. And we have a vibrant community where we have exchanges on how the specification can evolve, what are the best ways to express things, etc. And this all we can bring to your data space or improve the communication across the data spaces. And so with that, having said this introduction, I would like to hand over to our colleagues to give some testimonials and real life use cases where in the data spaces, in their data spaces, this kind of needs and to look out towards cross data space exchange appears.
Okay, thanks Bert for your introduction. What we want to do now is we have asked 3 testimonials, people who can explain what they're doing with DCAT-AP and how they got to where they are, and especially also how CEMIC could help them make their data spaces interoperable. So I'd like to go first to the first one, which is about mobility data space, and introducing Peter Lubrich. He is a scientific assistant at the Federal Highway Research Institute in Germany, and he deals with research and deployment in the area of data exchange in intelligent transport systems. And he'll talk to us about the work that they've been doing on the mobility DCAT-AP. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Max. Welcome, everyone. This is Peter from Germany, and I represent the mobility domain, or at least a part of it. So we have something called NAPCOR. We have something called the ITS directive, which is very known to my colleagues. So the European Commission has set up this directive to and foster and accelerate the so-called intelligent transport systems. And in NAPCOR is a project by the EU. We try to coordinate certain activities that are called national access points. So our domain or our data spaces today are called national access points. These are digital archives or data platforms for mobility data. And so far, there's a lot of coordination. So we try to handle this here via NAPCOR, including interoperability. So interoperability is more or less the same what Bert has been explaining. So we look at data exchange, protocol standards and other things, and try to do something for the ITS people. And again, so this is a very wide project. The metadata is only one part of it, but let's learn about what this means. So on the next slide, you see that we already have a very wide landscape of so-called national access points, or sometimes called NAPs. So you see all the logos, and the interesting fact is that it's not only the Union, also the UK and Switzerland and Norway are taking on this concept. So the mobility data is having their own data infrastructure. So they're using own portals quite often outside the open data world. So you see it's a very different world. But we have the same challenges, including a common metadata approach. So far there's no standardized metadata in those NAPs, but we are trying hard to do so, to make those NAPs interoperable at some point. So maybe at some point there will be a European access point or a European data space. So this is the future vision. On the next slide, we thought, well, everyone is having a DCAT-AP extension. Every professional community, every let's say stakeholder group is doing some metadata specifications there. The mobility people have not done this in this such manner. So there had been some experimental approaches, and we thought, well, why don't we have an own one for the mobility data domain? So we came up with the idea of an own extension called Mobility DCAT-AP, which is pretty much on the last mile before being published. So we are 1 or 2 weeks before publishing our first release. Of course, we try to follow the official extension rules. So we try our best to make this a formal extension with all the, let's say, rules and mechanisms to be applied. We of course try to look at RDF vocabularies that are out there, which are also important for us for mobility. For example, data quality is a high issue. So we try to reuse as much as possible from the data quality vocabulary, which is also a very known RDF vocabulary. So we try to pick and select what we feel makes sense for us, the domain in mobility. On the next slide, you will see how we interact with CEMIC so far. So when we started, we did not know each other. So we had to say hello, who are we, and so on. So I was just trying to explore CEMIC from a passive side, attending webinars, for example. Then we had some dedicated interviews with Max and Pavlina and all the colleagues here, and they give us some expertise on how to do it from scratch. Yeah, so this was very, very nice, and I'm very thankful for that. Then the CEMIC colleagues also have a very critical look on our first draft of Mobility DCAT-AP, which is also very thankful because we got very good quality checks there. And in the future, step number 4, we hope that we stay in touch closely between us and the CEMIC people, because we need to align DCAT-AP and Mobility DCAT-AP, because every time there are new versions, there are progress, and I think it's important to catch up and keep the flow going and keep up with future releases and learn from each other. So I'm really happy to be here with the CEMIC community and looking forward for your questions. This was my last slide.
Thank you, Peter. I understand from your presentation indeed that with your community you're basing yourself on existing work. Well, first of all, you had a directive to work from, and then you had a set of existing portals already to work with. But then you try to build on the existing standards and existing experience and expertise to also bring your community together around DCAT-AP as a standard. And I think that is something that would then also lead to the potential of interacting with other data spaces if your community has an established standard for people to use. I think that's exactly what DCAT-AP is used for. And you mentioned also the other communities that have extensions like Geo DCAT and Stat DCAT, and also national extensions. So that's something that the flexibility of DCAT-AP will allow you to do. Well, thank you. If there are any other quick questions from people, maybe. If not, we have a Q&A session after the testimonials, so you can come back to that then. I see we have the second one is Licinio, and I don't think Licinio is available yet. So if you don't mind, could we go to the next one? Yuri, would you be able to talk to your European Green Deal data space?
No problem, Max. Should I share my own screen?
We have your slides integrated here, so we can do that.
Okay. Okay, then you can please move ahead then. Yeah, thanks a lot, Max, for the floor, and thanks for the invitation.
I just introduce Yuri. Yuri is initially an electrical technical engineer and a computer scientist with a background in geo information. And currently he is a policy analyst at DG Environment. Yuri, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Max. That's been a long time ago, electromechanical engineer, but was it? Once in a time, I wasn't an engineer, but I moved on. So the European Common Green Deal data space. Next slide, please, Max. Well, just to give you a bit of a background overview, who we are, what we do. I'm a member of the digital team in the Director General for the Environment under Unit 01, which is a unit that keeps themselves busy with strategy, digitalization, better regulation, and economic analysis. We got 4 core tasks. One of the core tasks is the development, at least the coordination of the development, together with DG Connect, of the Green Deal data space. Part of that development is also the evolution of the infrastructure for spatial information in Europe, the INSPIRE directive, to become a very key element in bringing public data into the Green Deal data space. So interoperability is a key aspect. Was it in the past in the INSPIRE directive, and it will be even increasingly important in the future when we try to connect the different data spaces. We also work on geospatial intelligence to support compliance assurance and also to support flagging non-compliance issues in the member states, for example, illegal logging and things like that, illegal waste belts, all these kind of things. We also do digital coordination. That means we follow up on the emerging digital data files like the Data Governance Act, the Data Act, the Open Data Directive, the implementing regulation on high value data sets, and we follow up on the development of corporate commission data policy as well. Just to let you know that we have a conference in end of November, 28th and 29th of November in Brussels in the Bourget. It's called the INSPIRE conference, but this time it's going to be much broader. It's going to be extensively looking at the Green Deal data space, the application of the data spaces, use cases, and the evolution of the INSPIRE directive. Next slide, please, Max. Now, regarding, because that was a question I got, what are your challenges that you encountered when developing the Green Deal data space? I think the major challenges that we identified already a while ago is actually identifying a stakeholder community, identifying the essential data that should flow through this data space. And of course, the interoperability, as said by Berta and by Pavlina, is an essential part because the Green Deal data space has a very broad scope of data. And I'll give you one example. We come back to that one very briefly as well. If you look at electric vehicles and batteries is a regulation that is in the environmental acquis. So we have to lead on this. But there is also a direct link with mobility. So electric vehicles need to charge, discharge. There is a direct link with energy as well. So the charging poles has to be placed in a smart grid based on the fluctuations on the charging locations. You have to know how to develop this smart grid to see where people are charging and discharging. For environmental perspective, it's about extending the life cycle of the battery in the electric vehicle for repurposing for domestic use and so on. So there are a lot of interoperability overlaps on data, that show that the data should flow across all the data spaces. And there is an important governance issue there as well, that we have to be very clear who is going to be responsible for this data. Of course, metadata will be a key concept to serve this up, because there you will see what is available, how it can be reused, what are the conditions for the reuse. So metadata is central for solving a big part of the interoperability issue. We also want to do the same as everyone else. We need to have these enterprise architecture blocks or architectural building blocks on data, business cases, technology, to make sure that we stay compatible, interoperable, not only on the level of data, but also on the level of technology interfaces and so on. And we also have to move, because in the past, and certainly from a Commission point of view, we were very focused on data from a regulatory reporting perspective, but we have to move away from this cat getting data to support the policy, we have to go to a more user-centric approach to make the data available to develop products, to create innovation, to build the data economy for Europe. And of course, interconnecting all these fragmented solutions across the board is a very important aspect. We're working on this, but we're also supported by Digit with the Digital Europe program, and we have a supporting action which is called the GREAT project, and they're looking specifically in the community of practice, priority data sets, technical blueprint, governance, business models, and a roadmap for implementation. And if we have building blocks, that should feed into the Data Space Support Center, which is the central hub of knowledge to support the data spaces, and where we will record all the reusable building blocks that data spaces can be used for their implementation. Next slide, please, Max. So regarding the solutions, I think for the Green Deal data space, we're a bit early in the process because we're still defining the blueprint for the moment, but I hope by beginning of next year we will be more advanced and we'll start identifying the initial architectural building blocks. And that will be reported to the Data Space Support Center, and they will manage it. But on top of their work, of the work of the GREAT project and the Data Space Support Center, we have to be sure that we reuse as much as possible. We don't have to innovate all the time. We have to reuse as much as possible what the member states already have in place. So we have to respect the legacy, and we have to connect the legacy implementations to minimize the burden on the member states. At the same time, provide a level of interoperability that allows to integrate and exchange the data across the data spaces. Now, some possible candidates for standardization, of course, there is DCAT-AP that's already published on the website of the Data Space Support Center as one of the preferred ways of describing your metadata, because you have, of course, one of the important aspects is the discovery services, is showing the availability of data to the public, what is available. And the way you described it, it's through metadata. And in Inspire, we have been using the ISO meta standard for geographical information, but we're also aware that we need a common approach across all the data spaces, and there DCAT has been profiled and pushed forward as a good solution to solve the interoperability issue on the level of metadata. And fortunately, and we'll come back to this in the next slide as well. No, I'll just wait for this. I'll come back to it in the next slide. Or just go back once, Max, because metadata is very important for us, but also interfaces is also a very important aspect to make the data available across the data spaces. We will use data services, and there we're looking at the minimum interoperability mechanisms that is also put forward under the Open and Agile Smart Cities standardization effort as a MIM7 for geographical information places. But we are using these standards which are coming from the Open Geospatial Consortium already in the Inspire community, and this will also be used to some extent for the high value data sets. But that's also a very important aspect of standardization, interoperability, to make sure that the data can flow. After you identify the data through its metadata using DCAT-AP, then you should be able to access the data, and that's why you need the APIs. And we have to need some interoperability rules as well that can guide us to a common approach and interoperable implementations. Next slide, please, Max. And I think it's the last one. I hope I'm still keeping time. So our collaboration with CIMIC has always been very good. It's a long-standing collaboration with our colleagues from Digit and the CIMIC community. We've done a lot, but recently, and I'm looking at the last more or less the last year now, we're upgrading the DCAT-AP, and I saw that our Andrea Perego is actually one of the fathers of the DCAT-AP, is also in the webinar here. So good. Hi, Andrea. And we had a discussion last week as well to see if the DCAT-AP evolution, the version 3.0, would pose any problems for our GeoDCAT-AP that we already use, and it seems we are coming closer and closer every year. So it looks like DCAT-AP 3.0 will be satisfying the needs that the geospatial community has to map the mandatory standard that we use, the ISO 19115 on geospatial metadata, or metadata for geospatial information, to the DCAT-AP 3.0 will be an easy exercise and very straightforward in the future. And we've been doing this for a long time because we realized that within the geospatial community, we need a very specific metadata standard for describing the needs of that community for that geospatial data. But bringing all the data to the larger community and to the end users and possible use cases, we also feed it into the open data portal managed by the Publication Office. And there we developed this kind of the GeoDCAT-AP that maps the ISO standard to the GeoDCAT application profile, and then we have a transformation service in place that does this automatically. So people can provide a flavor of metadata, but we always convert this to the DCAT-AP to be published in the open data portal. And that evolution is even strengthening in a way that also at the Commission side, we realize we can't live anymore with so many portals. So we're trying to aggregate and bring all the portals together in one gateway for European data, which then would be the open data portal, which might also hold non-open data with some limitations on reuse. But that's the evolution that we have. So that was a big effort that we did together, and we're still working on this together with the Inspire community as well. And we hope this goes in a good direction and might be a foundation block for the developing of a catalog service, discovery service, and metadata descriptions for the Green Deal data space. And then next to that one, we also have collaborated on personal data spaces, where we did this extensive, well, we did a pilot that implements the provisions of the Data Act, which is very close to being adopted by Council and Parliament, and the Data Governance Act and the Open Data Directive. So all the legal provisions and the provisions of the Battery Directive were integrated in that pilot to show that, for example, a solid solution can cater for sharing data from a consumer using an electric vehicle with any other could be general purpose organization. In this case, with, for example, could be a DG environment that gets public citizen generated data or consumer data from an electric vehicle, just to know the life cycle of that battery and know its end of life. Then it can be repurposed for domestic use. And when it's end of life, a domestic use could be repurposed or recycled as secondary material. That was our angle. And for DG Energy, there was an angle on, let me see how this impacts the grids, people running around with electric vehicles and charging and discharging at different locations. How do we have to cater for a smarter grid that caters for this kind of evolution of having in the future having only electric vehicles around? And for that specifically with CEMIC, we did more than just GeoDCAT-AP, but we also looked at the Catena-X smart data models, W3C sense standards, and schema.org as main standardization initiatives to feed in that exercise. So being very happy with the exploration, and certainly on DCAT-AP, we know that we will be merging into a common approach the coming years. So I think that was my last slide, I believe.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
Yuri, for a very dense and good presentation. I think what you're actually saying is you're actually coming to work from a very active community already, a very established community through the Inspire directive. And I think also from that perspective, you see the value in trying to build interoperability across data spaces. And in the case that you were working on and in your community with CEMIC, the definition of the GeoDCAT-AP was already the first step in actually making that information more available. I had one question for you. You mentioned a transformation service, and maybe someone from the team can just put in the link in the chat so that people can look at that transformation service from ISO to GeoDCAT-AP. I have also a question, but that's a question I will raise again in the Q&A on the question to all the presenters to talk about how DCAT-AP supports interoperability of data, how you can actually say what the structure of the data is. And I think that's something for later on in the Q&A. But thank you very much, Yuri, for your presentation. I now wanted to move to our third testimonial, which was we have to go back a little bit on the slides. I think we have Licinio Custamano on the call, who will introduce the European health data space. He is a passionate advocate for digital health solutions, and he has worked with the European Commission since 2016, contributing to the development of the European health data space and IT infrastructures. In the past, he had various positions in academia, in the Portuguese Ministry of Health, and in a startup specialized in digital health interoperability. Currently, he plays an active role in DG Santé, the DG for health, to increase stakeholder awareness about the European health data space. And he also supports the European Commission in negotiations with co-legislators and contributes to the coordination of several implementation initiatives towards the European health data space. I give the floor to Licinio. Licinio, can we hear you?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
Without further ado, let me invite you to dream with me. So, have you ever dreamed in a world where all this health data that is generated from health data encounters all around Europe would be available for supporting researchers in advancing their research in new frontiers in healthcare, where we need them most? Imagine that we will also be able to support the industry, the innovators that are creating health products in providing them with data so that they can build products based on real world data. Imagine how we could support our national health system designers, the ones making the policies, support them with evidence, data evidence, as we saw, for example, during COVID time, and help them to design better policies. And also for our regulators that need to understand which are the safest products to put on the market, and even to assess what to reimburse or not in terms of medicinal products safety. So if you imagine that kind of world, we are together, and we are together in understanding that's a lot to be done, a lot, really a lot. And the European Health Data Space Regulation starts with that ambition. And in order to get that ambition right, we need to give a really first step, we consider a first step in the sense of the journey, of the data user journey, that is make health data discoverable at a European scale. This is extremely important. This is not about the borders of my country. This is about at European scale and for these purposes. And this is the ambition. So if we go to the next slide, please, we see that this ambition faces several challenges. The first one is that the health data categories are quite diverse. For example, we can speak about electronic health records, we can speak about health determinants, we can speak about genomic and proteomic data, we can speak about administrative and claims and reimbursement data, we can speak about population-wide registries, clinical trials, data from clinical medical devices, from research cohorts, and the list goes, well, not indeterminate forever, but it goes according to the Article 33, paragraph 1 in the regulation. This is to give you a sense that there is really a wide range of health data categories. So that's the first challenge, how to make all these type of data discoverable. Then there is this beautiful balance between meaningful descriptions with how much administrative burden we will put on the data holders, on the ones that are controlling the data. How much descriptors do we want, and how much will those descriptors support actually finding the data from the ones that are looking at it. And then additionally to just finding the data, also be able to describe the quality and the utility in the sense on for what this data has been prepared or curated for. So following these challenges, we find out, and we learn in the next slide, please, that there is already, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to keep the wheel turning and perhaps add an additional one to make it specific for the type of requirements we have regarding health data. And that wheels are turning in the DCAT-AP and the SEMI community. So the DCAT-AP is a standard that is already adopted by the Commission for policies regarding data discoverability. We heard in the previous presentation about the data portal, the European data portal, and that's it. It's the federation of several catalogs of data that allows users to discover it. We can speak open or not open. I don't think that's the question here. The question is the core function of that is enable data discoverability. And we also need to keep these wheels turning because we need a common standard for different data spaces. The European Health Data Space is one of many, and it's clear that you can already see the application where someone says, I would like to bring together data from the European Health Data Space with the environment data space, and I actually try to correlate why certain diseases are affecting populations more than others. Is it related with the environment? Is it related with agriculture, the food, the social economics? What is it? So it's a must to have a common standard between data spaces. But naturally, as you can see, health data have specific requirements. And that idea, that is this groundbreaking concept, it's so simple but so difficult, is extending without breaking. Meaning that we need to be common, we need to use the common parts of it together with our sisters and brothers data spaces. But we need to be able to add specificity, provide specific descriptors for that cope with health requirements. In that sense, we can provide just a little bit in terms of why would we need specialized requirements, because we have a data set description that is specific for data holders. Extend without break. Don't change what are the mandatory fields, properties in DCAT, but please let's keep in mind that there might be additional fields there. A data quality and utility label, that where quality and utility is very specific in terms of health data. And for that reason, we would like to have specific descriptors and properties for that purpose. And again, because this is an obligation for all data holders, I repeat, a dataset description is a legal obligation. It's not a voluntary thing. It's a legal obligation. It's fundamental to balance obligations and burden. If we go to my next slide, you will see how SEMIC has been fundamental in helping us move forward. First of all, it's clear that there's no one like the semantic community here with the experience that has done this before, being DCAT-AP maintenance, but actually creating extensions or application profiles for specific fields. And that's what we need to work with you guys to make sure that we rely on that experience to avoid the mistakes and the lessons you learned already in the past, but also ensure the consistency across the different data spaces. We believe that you will be or are already engaged with other data spaces, and keeping that consistent is fundamental. And in practical terms, SEMIC has been helping us, sorry, time's up, I guess. So SEMIC has been supporting us in what we call the Health Data at EU pilot. Health Data at EU is our infrastructure to facilitate secondary use of health data. And the SEMIC community and Digit have been supporting us in designing what we call the DCAT-AP Health Application Profile, meaning addressing the specific requirements and obligations that come from the European Health Data Space Regulation without breaking the compatibility with other data spaces. I'm so happy. This is just the beginning, so much to be done, but I believe we are in the right track and in the right company. Pleasure to answer any questions you may have for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Licinio. I think your dream, is the same dream that we share. I also think what you're presenting was the community that you have, which has, like the others, enormous amounts of data, but also with specific requirements for, I guess, for privacy and for quality. You've said also what I think is important, and also Yuri mentioned that the governance issue is very important. You actually mentioned also the purpose that data was created. And also you say there is something there is a balance. You need to have good descriptions, but also you cannot put too much burden on the people who create the data. So I think that is something that certainly in the wider area of data spaces, the governance issue is something that is really important and should be taken into account. Also, when developing application profiles, those things are also things that need to be managed. And as you said, the SEMIC team has quite a lot of experience in building those models and also in managing them for the longer term. And I think that's really good. Thank you very much, Licinio, for your presentation. Also, the other two presenters. I'd like to open the floor. There is one question also I saw in the chat. A couple of people were interested in how the speakers see the support that DCAT-AP can give to data interoperability, to understanding what the structure and the meaning of the data is rather than the metadata. Any of you, Peter, Yuri, Licinio, or Bert, have an opinion on that? Any of you? Yuri?
Yeah, I think I'm coming from a domain where we have been using a very strict implementation of interoperability by defining all the data that should have been made available under the INSPIRE directive in data teams to start with as a head category, and then go down in descriptions and data models, how these data teams have to be modeled across Europe to be interoperable. So we had a very strict approach, also realizing after 15 years of implementation that there is no one model because everybody has different needs. So user needs, they vary, and they also vary in quality of data, granularity of data, attributes that are needed. So it's very difficult to have a common model that satisfies all the needs. Of course, in the metadata, we've taken care of this by having a link to a possible data model that is implemented. So we have the category, and once you know which category a data set belongs, and you know which data models apply to these categories, and then you have a link to the data model that you can use to validate the content against if you want to. So we have validators that validate provided content against the suggested the UML models and XML models that we have. So that's the case, but it's shown to be very, very difficult and very difficult to maintain. And I'm still hoping that with this area of better interpretation, automatic interpretation of content online, that artificial intelligence and machine learning can really help us to map the original data to the expected data on the end user side much easier, without having to go to the strain of having excessive descriptions of models and taxonomies for all the data. I think there can be many taxonomies. We have for one category, we can have 4 or 5 taxonomies depending on the use cases. So it's a matter of who are you serving, who do you want to serve, what flexibility do you have to guarantee, how much pressure would you put on the data provider. And there I'm very happy that we have the Data Governance Act and that we have a growing amount of intermediaries that are taking that burden away from data providers. They're providing the intelligence to map the source data against the use cases that have been identified. I think that's an important track, and it goes hand in hand with the level of interoperability that we should have. So providing a direct link to a model to which the data is model is very helpful, also for a data intermediary. So I would think it would be satisfactory to just have a link to an online taxonomy, an online data model that gives a machine or a person an idea of how the data is modeled, what is in there, and then can automatically further process the data. So you don't need extensive data modeling capacity in metadata, but you need a URI and I think that's already catered for in DCAT-AP as far as I know, and could be satisfactory.
Peter Licinio?
Yeah, talking about models and taxonomy. So in our case, we the metadata approach and national access points was very pragmatic. So people just took whatever they thought would make sense. So some of them already use DCAT-AP or some dialects or some own extensions. Some of our platforms used proprietary metadata schemes, which were not very far from DCAT-AP. So what we had to do is to combine and bring together existing taxonomies, ontologies that were there. One funny thing was that all the mobility aspects that were part of the status quo metadata, most people used the keywords because there was nothing that they could use. So the keywords was the standard solution to describe anything about mobility, which we thought, okay, this might be a pragmatic solution, but we need a more expressive taxonomy for that. So any things describing the mobility systems can be better described as an ontology with more hierarchy levels, with distinguished properties and so on. So this was one of the main tasks for our mobility domain. So we have taxonomies and models on our agenda to make them more expressive, and this is our job today.
Thank you. Licinio?
I would say perhaps very simple things, and perhaps everyone knows this, but just to state. So starting with finding the right balance between meaningful descriptors that allow people to discover the data, and also the administrative balance. So that's our starting point. The second one, I think this is known for everyone, but to be clear, the data model for the metadata itself is one thing, and this is something that in terms of the regulation, we can define and we can set the legal obligations. So this is the data model for the metadata, but this is not necessarily linked with the data model of the data inside of the data set. So this should be strictly, it's a very important distinction. Final step for us is we have benefit from these international used or terminologies, ontologies, depending how we want to call. So we have things like SNOMED-CT, ICD-10 or ICD-11. We have EDQM, we have LOINC. And in some cases, or let me put it this way, these are some of the things we would like to capture in the properties in our metadata for the health data, and perhaps these vocabularies need to be added. We understand that there is a requirement for vocabularies or ontologies that are open, and this may not be applicable to all the standards that I just mentioned, and also the idea of small value sets of 40 concepts in them. And perhaps we need, like SNOMED-CT has 400 terms, concepts in it, perhaps we may need to work with the idea of value sets. And this brings me to the topic of terminology services. How are these vocabularies made available and how they will be made available for the European health data space in particular? So, Max, I'm providing you tips on the things that we are covering in the work that we are doing. Not solutions, but to let you know, these are some of the requirements we have that we try to address.
Okay, and I saw someone on the chat pointing to a session at the CEMIC 2023 Congress in Madrid on the 18th of October. So is there, I didn't see, is there a link to in the chat to that session?
Matthias here. Yeah, I pasted it in the chat. It's the EU-wide registry of public sector semantic models. There were a conference or a teleconference session earlier this year about this, and there were some ideas discussed in the chat about this.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the speakers on the testimonials? People want to raise their hand or put some questions in the chat? Anything that you want to have clarifications for? Bert, maybe you want to say something also on that part on the link to data models?
I think this is indeed a topic that is being discussed once in a while and comes up. So it is good that there's attention for it. And as a bit already mentioned in the chat, is that with DCAT-AP, we can make the existence of those data structures, those data models already visible, transparent, known to everyone. And based on that knowledge of making that available, we can discuss if there are some expectations or rules or how this should be represented, so that they are more exchangeable or interpretable, machine interpretable, and what kind of these vocabularies, ontologies, or how we can name them, can be used, and so on. And this is the connection. So where we go from the metadata perspective to the data perspective, and that we have, we might see how data spaces would like to formulate this, and if there's some standardization or a road towards this, then we can adopt this as a good practice into our metadata and say, if you're going to represent your data structure, use the common approach or the agreed approach within the general data space community.
And as I can see it from the collaboration around DCAT-AP, it is possible for people to find solutions that are common across data spaces, so that at least you know what you're getting. It's not necessarily that you'll also be able to interoperate on that data if you have very different models, but at least you know what kind of models you can expect. Matthias, you had your hand up? Matthias?
Yes. I wrote in the chat earlier that I saw that maybe there are 3 directions that you could use to support data spaces. The first being provide some kind of detailed categories, maybe the 13 levels that we have now of themes, and very specific, what are they called again? Well, we have another vocabulary to use. Maybe there is something in between needed. Level 2 would be to use these kind of profiles like DCAT, stat DCAT, NAPCore, etc., to capture more specific metadata fields that you need to describe data sets within a specific domain. And level 3 go into the metadata structure to actually describe via the conforms to the data structure via ontologies or UML models or something. Are we all? Is this a good way of looking at it, that we have these 3 levels, or what's the SEMIC view? How did you think of this?
Well, I think we can discuss it. I don't think today we have the people in the room to actually discuss that in any detail. But I just wanted to say that whenever data spaces work together on DCAT-AP, those are the kind of things that we really would want to support data spaces in. First of all, I think data spaces are, of course, busy getting their own act together within their data space. Then through SEMIC, we can work also to look at what the common ways are to doing that. And I think your suggestion to have sort of the 3-level approach, I think makes sense from what I hear now. We certainly would want to discuss that further, also with the other data space, to see how that can be filled in. I think that the conclusion there is that the more data spaces work together and are involved in the DCAT-AP work, the better we can actually serve everybody. And it was already said, there are already different application profiles that add a little bit more of the specifics, the specific requirements of domains, without actually losing the possibility to have the interoperability across those data spaces. And I think the way that we can extend what DCAT-AP does currently for data spaces, if we can work together with all of you to do that, I think that would help all of us. And I think that is something, a conclusion, I think, also from the testimonials that we have. Everybody works together on building their own application profile that responds to the needs and the requirements of their domain. And then through SEMIC, we can work together to have cross-domain interoperability. And certainly, Matthias, the point you brought forward is that the next step after realizing this discovery across data spaces is indeed looking at what we can do, how we can facilitate also more information and more services on data interoperability. But I think currently we're in the phase of creating more discovery across data spaces, and I think that's the first step that we need to take and that we're taking with many of you. And then from that discussion, we'll certainly come up with additional things that people want to share, and then we can work from SEMIC on those points that people think are important for their wider interoperability.
And I agree with it. And actually, this kind of phasing, Matthias, has been as well reached us in other words from an assessment from the health data space. So one partner in the health data space actually made a similar assessment to give that to the peers in the community over there. Look, you have to agree on the discoverability, but at certain points we have to agree on the data itself. And they had other names for the levels, but that's essentially the same assessment. So I think many people agree on this level of assessment. And maybe it's good that I then show what are the service offerings that we see as SEMIC.
Yeah, go ahead.
So based on our testimonials and the introduction, we would like to present to you what is kind of the CEMIC service offering that we offer around DCAT-AP to you as a community, a data space community, and then discuss with you how we can help you and if you have interest in certain levels, etc. And what are you think we need to maybe to do more or additional attention. So as we already discussed, so a lot of things around DCAT-AP as our ecosystem. So where we focus on this findability of the data sets and to make these catalogs connected and interoperable, and so to make that all things, so that we have this nice thing, this ecosystem working not only for a single data space, but across data spaces. And for all of this, these ecosystem, we have turned this into a translation to a CEMIC service. And we just want to illustrate this again with something that we conducted in close collaboration with DG Connect, is the DCAT-AP for high-value data sets, where we actually looked, when we started from this regulation, we looked into it, we discussed with the community what are the rules, how we can extend DCAT-AP in a way that works for the context of the high-value datasets implementing regulation, and the end result is an annex to DCAT-AP. So we add more rules to use in the context of this. This is the end result of that work. And that is a focus where we work within a data space. You can imagine this is within one scope, the high-value dataset implementing regulation, and we have worked within that. And this is the usual common way of working on a domain-specific or data space-specific or extension. But of course, in that, and this is the most important thing that we want to share with you, is that we take an outlook towards our peers, the broader perspective. For instance, there are some properties added. We considered that and we looked for those properties if they are being useful outside the context of the single scope. And there are some. So we lift them then in and we bring them to the DCAT-AP community so that they become available for the whole community, for all data spaces. We did an assessment in there that look the data sets that we are describing in the context of the high-value data sets and implementing regulation, already existing data sets. How we can, and as Lucinio already mentioned, reduce the burden for those publishers that they only have to do a little bit extra work and not too much starting from scratch in another context, publishing the same data. So we ensure and to try to promote as much as possible this once only way of working for the publisher. And then bring this together and embed this all in a long-term maintenance with Connect and a publications office to make this annex in a way that it can be maintained and in a setting that is long-term. So these are the aspects that we want to share, and these are the more important things in this broader context of data space interoperability that we want to bring and offer to data space community. So what we see and how we structure it, and so this is a reach out to anyone who wants to start. You can come to us and just ask, as Peter mentioned in the mobility, well, I need some documentation, I want to get some exploration, come and give me some introductory to it, and then you start with your community yourself. That's level one. Just reach out, we talk, and we try to help you to the best and to give you, to provide with the level of information as much as possible. If we are going a bit further, then you can ask us for a particular task. And one of this, in the second level, is something that is probably very useful, is to have a review of your specification of your work at a certain point in time. At some typical point in time in the work of creating your own DCAT-AP specification for your data space, that you would like to have some feedback, some community to see the assessment, whether or not what this is in line, what are the challenges, etc. A third level is even more that we participate in the creation process. So we do all the previous things, but we participate in the creation process, where we give during the process advice, insights, try to already to early on detect cross data space interoperability issues, and to give that kind of active participation into it. And level 4, and that's where you say, okay, as a data space, look, we feel that we want to give everything as most in the operational and in the maintenance and in the coordination of the creation of the DCAT-AP specification we want to create out of hands, and then SEMIC can take care for that. So we are open for all these kind of levels of interaction. What you want, we can discuss. But in the end, what is the important thing is you result in a data space specification specific for you, which is interoperable, or at that point in time, with the DCAT-AP broader community. So this is what we want to facilitate, and this is, let's say, our service offering, where you can ask and come to us for that. And of course, at this level, then you come into, let's say, the broader community. And of course, we have then some concrete actions. And so this is something that comes then in the broader thing that you become aware of. And this is a first announcement that's in our process of the ongoing activities on DCAT-AP to align with W3C DCAT-AP 3. So we have just officially the public review set of comments was ended last week, but we are now processing them, and we see that we will create for you and reach out to you on 2 webinars. One is to provide you an overview of all the activities on the parallel tracks, where they are, which issues have been taken into account, how far we can go to adoption, or we have to do additional work. And for DCAT-AP on the alignment itself, already we identified that there are a few technical issues which we want to have your feedback and consensus upon to make an adoption of DCAT-AP 3.0 at the 21st of November. So these are actions that you come out of our services, that we bring it into it, and we try to share this then as much as possible. And in parallel, we try to share these insights and to make them more adaptable for the data space community as well, is to look for basic training materials. So the reach out is level 1, to make that more easy to start good. So to have some basic training material that you can kickstart yourself, together with the outcome of the technical discussion that we will have on how to create, profile, and extend DCAT-AP. That's one of the technical issues we want to discuss on the 21st of November. And we want to write this out as a kind of a guideline and to share this with the community as well. So it's not only for the DCAT-AP then, but as a data space approach that we want to organize this and to document and to align us as community on it. And this service of offering is, of course, we are not alone. And so in the context of data spaces, you already mentioned that we are not the only one supporting. We take a tiny bit on it, the perspective of this findability. There is the broad access points where you have questions and everything is coordinated, the data space support center. And we take there the role for everything what has to do with this discoverability on around DCAT-AP, and to facilitate and to take their our stakeholder role into it. We have normally Lina, if I'm right, in the call to say some words about the Data Space Support Center and their activities. in this context or broader context?
Yes, I'm here. Should I just start or?
Yeah, sure, you can start. Yes, yeah.
Okay. I will share my screen.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for having me here. After listening to such interesting discussions and to hear more about the applicability of the DCAT-AP, I will also like to talk about the Data Spaces Support Center and why it was created. So I want to start with the motivation. So as we heard before, data spaces are essential to enable data sharing in a sovereign, interoperable, and trustworthy manner. And there are different independent initiatives which are aiming to establish data spaces. But this task is not easy because if there are lack of common guidelines and standards, this can result in duplication of effort, a higher cost, and of course, incomplete or fragmented implementation of the data space concept. With the identification of these problems, the European Commission funded the Data Space Support Center as part of the Digital Europe program. And the aim of this support center is to support the different initiatives and companies to create their own data spaces by following standards and guidelines. The DSSC, which is the Data Space Support Center, helps them to create common data spaces that are in line with the European data strategy. And in this way, it supports the European Union values and as well as the economy and society in this way. So how is this possible? This is possible thanks to different associations which work together in different subdomains of data spaces. So we have here academia, we have also organizations and companies that work together to make this true. So the mission of the support center is to help create these data space initiatives, especially by exploring the needs of these specific domain-specific data spaces, and to help them define the common requirements by following best practices, and in this way to accelerate the formation of sovereign data spaces. And as I mentioned before, respecting the values of the European Union. Why is this necessary? This is going to help the stakeholders to make better decisions and to contribute to the objectives of, for example, the Green Deal and the other plans, common plans that these stakeholders have, as it was mentioned in previous presentations. So the support center is based on an asset approach. So there are different assets. What we can see here in the blue part are the technical assets, but there are also governance and organizational assets. And I want to explain a little bit more what this blueprint consists of. So the blueprint is comprehensive and is consistent, and is a set of guidelines that help the different stakeholders to support the implementation of data spaces. In this guideline, we have a glossary in which the different curated terms are specified, and also there is a conceptual model which is domain specific and describe the different concepts and the relationship between these concepts in a data space. In a more technical perspective, there are building blocks which can work together to achieve the full functionality of a data space. And again, for each building block, there are different specifications and reference implementations. When it comes to the semantic interoperability, which is very relevant for us in this webinar, we have different building blocks, and what is highlighted here in red are the components in which the DCAT-AP plays a role. For example, with regard to the data models, we have that the DCAT-AP should be followed for describing new vocabularies, which are then available in the vocabulary hub. Then, with regards to the data value creation, again, DCAT and also specifically DCAT-AP are recommended for describing data services and the offerings in these data spaces. And this description should be available by the publication and discovery via the data catalogs. What the Data Space Support Center offers is help with regards to different activities, and also offer a platform for knowledge, helping in this way the different communities of practices to make a reality their data spaces. And it supports this initiative at different maturity levels. This work is continuously evolving, and what I want to highlight here is the collaboration with the CEMIC is with regards to the semantic interoperability. So to follow the specification to create, for example, more specific data models, as I mentioned here, the data models, or to describe the data and service offerings, one should follow the specifications that are provided by CEMIC. So, and in a more higher level, what the Data Space Support Center helps to achieve is to collect the requirements of these different domains to implement their own data spaces by following the best practices. To have a better overview of this initiative, you can access the different resources that are available online, and you can also contact via this email address. I want to then thank you for your attention, and if you have more specific questions regarding this presentation, you can contact me. Thank you.
Just to say that unfortunately your presentation, Alina, was not in a presentation mode. You were sharing the screen, so I am afraid that for some participants the content of your presentation was not 100% visible, but I wanted to reassure our audience that we will incorporate your slides into the slides that are going to share on the join up page, as I said, that we usually do after each webinar. So sincere apologies to our stakeholders.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lina. I think it's clear that the Data Space Support Center provides services to all these communities, and that CEMIC is the partner that you're working with to ensure semantic interoperability, and especially also because DCAT-AP is part of your building block diagram. So we're happy to have this collaboration with the Data Space Support Center. And thank you also, Bert, for your presentation on the services that CEMIC provided. At the end, I'd like to open the floor also to questions. I saw there is one discussion also already going on in the chat, which is basically on the first question here, the challenges for interoperability, and something was mentioned is common code lists. Are there any people who want to put their opinion here? If you want to raise your hand, if you want to provide some, Matthias, here.
So yeah, just like this pre-conference workshop, going to discuss about models on like European scale registry of models. I think we should think the same of vocabularies. or code lists. I also think that these vocabularies or models should not be maintained manually by CEMIC or publication office. I think it should be valuable to consider them to be harvested, just like data sets and data services in data catalogs. A mechanism that could be used for this is to actually consider national repositories of models and terminologies as data sets that could be harvested and then interpreted and unpackaged and provided in such a registry. Final thought, there will be a challenge to not have duplicates in such a registry, as many will define their own models in relation to existing models, like core vocabulary, core business vocabulary, or core person vocabulary. So that's a real challenge to deduplicate existing models that are shared across all of Europe.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think there was a comment also in the sense that there is a need to have common code lists, common vocabularies, but there may also be a need, and there is also a need to have domain-specific ones, sort of in addition to it. So it's also a little bit your layered approach, Matthias. I think here you also can see that it's beneficial to have a common code list. For example, in data.europe.eu, there is a 13 element description code list for the domain that the data is relevant for, but there's also, and we see that in the health environment and mobility environment, there are specific terms that are useful for domains. And I think there's also something that, as Bert says, in the services we provide, we can also give advice about which code lists already exist or already are being used by other domains. Any other comments on code lists, common code lists, and domain-specific code lists? I saw Yuri and Johan commenting on that in the chat.
Briefly,
also
just because the layered approach, we also have to take into consideration the difference between a formal and a non-formal code list as well. You got code list supporting implementation from different domains, but you also have a code list representing legal terminology that is in directives in regulations. And there you have to have a consistent representation and governance body that maintains these code lists, make sure that they are reused across the different domains to get certainty, but also have this central body of evidence and authority that provides the legal certainty. And that's also very important. And that is very important. And I'm giving the example that Brett gave on the high-value data sets, how to identify a data set as a high-value data set, to apply a term there, a code word, and that has to be across the board in all the different approaches and the different implementations across the data spaces. We have to use the same keywords in a code from a central code list to identify the high-value data sets there, so they can be reused across the different data spaces. So just to say that the layered approach also goes for formal and non-formal code lists.
And you also again raised the issue of the governance of the source of truth, and you need to be aware, and especially also in the growing environment of data spaces, that all these things need to be maintained for the long term. That you can't have situations where your code list disappears and is unclear what things mean. And I think this is also something that I think is a challenge for interoperability. Someone said sometime that interoperability creates certain kind of interdependency. So we need to be careful there that there are organizations, for example, CEMIC or the Publications Office, that have a role in maintaining some of it, and that all the other domain-specific ones also need to have some way of governance, long-term governance, not just for a project period, but for decades to come. And I think this is an important part. Interoperability is brittle. If things go wrong, you might not be able to understand the data that is there. So I think this is a governance issue is probably an important one to tackle as well. Anyone, maybe Florian, you want to say something about this cooperation on code lists with the Publications Office?
Hi, Max. It's simply the fact that there are code lists for which, together with OP, we make sure that I think the latest one was on high-value datasets teams, that the ones that were referred in the directive were captured and published for everyone to reuse through OP. But we are always looking for more inputs, for more code lists that are relevant. And I think for that, the point of Geraldine was also interesting. But
which ones?
The one she shared the Inspire registry containing more than, I think, 300 code lists. But that's only the first step, in the sense that what we are collaborating with OP around code lists is really the development and publications of code lists, while from what I can see, that's exactly also what Inspire has done in different domains. So now maybe a discussion that should start is about the discoverability of those code lists across domains. And such discoverability, what would be the role of CEMIC in this? And I think that's more a topic for the pre-conference workshop, as related to other topics in the chat.
Yuri has his hands up.
I have to come back now because Florian mentioned the Inspire registry, and then I have to come back, of course, just to mention that this is actually implementing what Matthias was talking about, the layered approach, in the sense that this registry provides a core list set at the level of the European legislation, allows member states and national registries implementing the same software to extend these code lists, so they inherit the code list and extend the code list, or even provide a language version on the code list to have these implementations, but still referring to the legal base in the end that is managed at the central location with the central body of governance as well. So that's a very federated approach, and that's one of the options to follow. It goes beyond the functionality offered for the moment by the Publication Office, which is a central repository stop and the end of the line. So that is something to be discussed as well, where I think CEMIC can really provide additional value to bring this discussion to a larger audience, also in view of DCAT and the definition of terminology, vocabularies, including core lists as well. Just
okay, thank you. Any other observations there on code list or on?
If I can have some addition, maybe, Max?
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Yes, Geraldine from Flanders, Belgium. I think we also have to check not only on the same using of same code lists, but also on the maintenance part of the data providers. Because now, for example, in the geospatial world, we provide already a lot, but then we created DCAT-AP for open data portals, and then there came other teams. And so at that point, every data provider had to add keywords for that sector as well. And now all the data spaces hop up. So you have keywords for mobility and NAP, you have keywords for health. And so they have to redo and redo every time again to fulfill all of that in their base description, because we want to do it for the once only principle, of course. And so that is really the maintenance part of it, I think. If we can do it in one code list, we should be able to map from the one to the other. And we don't have to oversee that kind of work and maintenance issue as well. Because it only will appear in that data space if every data provider had the correct keywords filled in, and otherwise we are nowhere.
Thank you. I think that makes sense. The way that things can be mapped together, I think, is an important part, and also it touches upon the governance issue. Someone needs to be responsible for the maintenance, and the people who are responsible also need to have a little bit of an overview of the things that happen also in other data spaces. So I think this is also something that in CEMIC we've been talking about, and I think will be a discussion that we will have in the future as well with DCAT-AP implementers. Any more questions on this issue? Challenges that you see for interoperability apart from the terminology hubs or the mapping of code lists?
I would like to add something. My name is Tulus Korsberg, and I work in the Norwegian Directorate of eHealth. And we have had a specification for metadata for health data sources for 4 or 5 years now. And we have seen that it's challenges to map it to DCAT. First of all, because we don't really know what is a data set, because a data source could be a health registry. We have that in the Nordic countries. We have a health service, and health service, they can have questionnaires and they can have biobanks. And all this structure, so we had to start with a kind of logical model or a breakdown structure for what contains what's inside a health data source. That we would like to share metadata about. And a typical health registry could have subregistries, and each subregistry have variables, or they could be questions, or it could be other things. And one variable have a term, but that doesn't mean that the term on the same concept could be different from registry to registry. And the variable has a link to the code list or the value sets or what you call it. And we've seen that the research is very important for the researchers to see if they are applying for data from one data source, 2 data sources, 3 data sources, to see if it's much work to match them together. And then they have to see something about the semantic interoperability. And that is, for example, if all these data sources contain gender or sex or what you call it, what code list have they been based on? Have they the same codes? Have they only women and men? Or do they have unknown and everything? And if they don't know that, we don't give them information about how much work it will be to map them together. Is the data sets you are applying for, are they semantically interoperable? So when we speak about now code lists, I think we have to start to speak about the variables and then the code lists. And there should be a link between it. And that is very difficult for us to translate and share in a DCAT context. We share now only information about the registry itself or the containing sub-registries inside a main registry. For example, a cancer registry that has sub-registries for prostate cancer, colon cancer, and everything. So the structure itself just allows us now to share high-level information about the cancer registry itself and the sub-registries. And there we just use it as distributions, but that's the only way we can do it so far. So this is something we have practical information for at least 2-3 years now to share it with both the national metadata catalog in Norway, cross-sectorial, and the European Health Data Portal. And I still miss a kind of logical breakdown structure with classes that belongs to each other and the connection between them and a discussion about that.
Okay, so I think it's an interesting part indeed when you have already a running data space with the data and agreements, then mapping that is a challenge. And as you say, there might be things in data spaces that might not be completely easy to map. And I think that is certainly an issue for creating the interoperability between data spaces. I see Alberto has a comment here. Roberto, we don't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Sorry.
Okay.
My main concern is regarding what happened between major versions of the one standard. An example, DCAT-AP 2.11 and 3.0. Maybe there is 18 months, 24 months, and this can happen. What happens in between? So there is no candidacies, there is no minor reviews. So supposedly we are expecting that the market is taking one regulation, waits 2 years or whatever it takes in time, and then in 2-3 years adopt the new regulation. I don't think that this really matches what is expecting the market. The market is expecting to kind of a more constant evolution or candidacies or candidate versions and so on. And I don't think that we are feeling this with the current approach. And that's why I know that it's kind of a commercial, is that what we do at the Smart Data Models is we launch very frequent versions with minor increasing steps and providing this for the major versions as an input. But something is needed in between, because otherwise the market will ignore the standards.
Is it something that you want to respond to, Bert?
Okay.
Cycle.
Yeah. So on this, I think we have to distinguish between adoption in a technical sense and adoption in semantical sense. What I want to make it is this difference is that if you make a piece of software and you add a property into it and you hard code that property into your software and you have to add a new property, then it comes with a certain complexity and effort to create that. Now, what is at the level of DCAT-AP ecosystem specification, it's actually an open-ended specification. That's the first thing that you have to know. That means that we are actually always in evolution, but we only endorse at very long, for you, long periods. What means it is that you can always extend, and it's with the extensions and the variations, with your own extending way, your personal attention things on it. You always can do. This is semantically correct. Now, when it comes to a clash and a concern is when we agree as community that a property is going to be used or a class is going to be used for a particular purpose. And you had an implementation based on your own property, on your own extension, and you have to adopt to this new common agreed approach. That's where the challenge always is into it. And here it's a both way thing. So it goes to on one hand, the DCAT-AP specification is quite broad, has a very broad interpretation, and that's why we can interoperable and make a picture of over the different data spaces. But at the same time, it's not precise. It can be very precisely used in a one particular data space. But then you have to know I'm using it in that particular data space, in that particular implementation. And that can have different evolutions and speeds of evolution and so on. And this can work together if everyone wants to share it, of course, and we are visible on it. And is willing to adopt and to change things. So for instance, to give a big change that has happened and is still ongoing in the community is we had DCAT 1 and DCAT 2. What is the main difference between the two is that in DCAT 1, how you distribute your data sets was identified in a single class distribution. Everything was a distribution. And we debated a lot in the community and say, okay, we would like to make a difference on the nature of files distribution versus service distribution. So in the DCAT W3C standard, there has been adopted to make a distinction between the two notions. And it leaves it still a bit open. So you can still be backwards compatible in the sense of using everything sharing as a distribution. So your API, you can still do it. But in our reading of DCAT-AP as we stand today, we have made it more strict. And we say the intention is that if you have a service, you denote it as a service. And if you have a file sharing approach, you denote it as a distribution. We motivate to move towards that vision so that you have a better end user practice and experience and assessment on top of it. Now, if I today, and then so we have the DCAT-AP high value dataset annex, it's actually even strengthening that, because in that regulation, implementing regulation says you have to share information about APIs. It's a very strong focus in that regulation. What is if we look in DCAT-AP 2, it's very easy. APIs are services. So you mean you have to encode it as services. Now, I know, and this is where then the evolution track comes in implementation. Implementers have to change from this DCAT 1 perspective to a DCAT 2 perspective. And this is always painful. However you want to call it, and that will not be incremental, and quick changes will make that pain go quicker or lower on it. I think here for us, and this is the thing, an invite to have the community, is that we try to connect our DCAT-AP extensions and variations way more. So there was one comment into it. We would like to see an overview of all the different variants, and but the most important thing is that they get interconnected, that things get moved and be more nicely interlinked on top of each other. And that requests can go bottom up and top down in a good way. And then the speed as such is not so problematic.
No, I think it's something that you were saying, Bert, and also Alberto. I know, Alberto, where you're coming from. You're actually saying publish often, and then sort of your incremental create better services. We've been talking about that a lot in the DCAT-AP community over the years, because there are some people who are like you, who want to have like quick changes, but there are people who actually have to invest in building systems and have contracts that specify, that have a specification as one of their documents, and they don't want to change, they can't change. So we found out that we still have implementations on DCAT 1, and they are sort of still planning an upgrade. And we found sort of a balance between the two. What we have is a structure where we do basically every year a new version. We have intermediate versions also for bug fixes, but we have every year there is a slot for an upgrade. As Bert says, we try our best to make those things backward compatible so that people can actually experiment themselves without actually affecting the standard, the document that people use for their procurement. And there's the balance between the two. I think we still try to have that. It's basically based on a consensus in the community to do it this way. And I think if there is a need from your perspective, Alberto, to do it more often, then we could bring that to the community and saying, well, we've decided that 3 or 4 years ago that this is the cycle that we have. Is the cycle still adequate? And I think that's also something that we can discuss in the DCAT-AP community. Do people think we need to be quicker, or do people think that it is good in order for them to plan their procurement? So I think it's a good point that you're making, Alberto. There are different ways of doing things, but we need to be careful. You're muted again. You're muting.
Sorry, my minor point is that I agree that the change in a system for a new version, this is something terrible, expensive, and I don't want to mean that to have more official versions, because I know that an official version requires quite a detail, but to have something in between for people testing so they can improve the new official version. But from my point of view, is not very operative is that you have one version, you gather supposedly inputs, and then you do something new. But if you are releasing, let's say, candidates, or maybe the name is not proper because candidate looks like something official, but draft versions or whatever you call it, then the people can test it and can have practical claims or practical advices. Oh, this is not the right way. This is not. And then the next version, on one hand, will be quicker because you have already tested many things. And in fact, at the Smart Data Models, we have contributed with some new potential features for DCAT-AP 3.0 based on people who are using these things. And we have submitted that. So we are not meaning, oh, we need more versions. No, this is not the point. The point is that we have to test on real scenarios, potential cutting dates before releasing a new version. This is what we want to help you out.
Okay, good. We note that. I think we already try to do something like that with review periods, but I think it might be improved in also recruiting people like yourselves to do early testing of new features. So I think that's a good point. We'll put that on the list of ideas for the work on DCAT-AP in the next couple of months. By the way, I see we're running towards the end of the session. Are there any other points that people want to bring up?
I just wanted to also chip in very briefly here. As an implementer myself of DCAT-AP, I have been providing feedback in the issues, and I think it is possible to work the way you described, Max, and also the way Bart has talked about, to provide new. We can experiment. For instance, we added in Sweden, we added offer, a way of saying that some data sets cost money. We haven't really spread that to many others, but something that could be picked up by others. It doesn't conflict with anything. We are okay. It works well with the current DCAT-AP. I'm also now implementing the high-value data set flags, and I'm going to provide some feedback on that in the review period right now. Actually, it's ending, I think. There are issues there, like what does it mean to have a high-value catalog, and so on. So I think that works. It is sometimes painful. You can experiment, and sometimes you have to revert or write scripts to convert your data because the way you suggested to develop something turned out to take another path when it got accepted by everyone. So I guess that's the cost of being on the front line of implementing the standard. So hopefully that gives you some pointers about that it's possible to work that way.
Okay, thank you. I think Alberto, you want to lower your hand? You're still up. If there are no more questions, I think in the later slide you will see all the links to where you can go, but let's just move on then to the closing session. So Pavlina, you want to take over there?
Yes, sir. Thank you, everybody, for attending this webinar. For us, it was very important to bring the audience together and highlighted the importance of interoperability between data spaces, and with intention is to show that DCAT-AP can help not only to better organize your metadata inside your data space, but also to think that the cross interoperability between the data spaces is something that it may be needed in the future. That's why, in terms of DCAT-AP, this also will show that many people are concerned about the new version. So we since we have received a lot of response from our stakeholders are working in a group on the DCAT-AP. Our intention is to have the 7th of November a dedicated webinar on discussion of about status and governance, and then the 31st of November to go deeper into technical issues. The first webinar, the 7th of November, will also tackle issues that are related to the high value data set. We posted some links into the chat regarding the official release of DCAT-AP 3, which is going to also be discussed the technical issues on during the second webinar. What we wanted to accomplish with this webinar, the current webinar, is to raise awareness, and we want. It is our intention to publish a training material in order to help our stakeholders to try to understand better how to implement the DCAT-AP under the context of data space. It was tools concern about the health DCAT-AP, as well as to provide some guidelines on profiling and extended DCAT-AP. We believe that this will be very helpful for data spaces that are just starting the effort on implementing, try to understand how they could implement the DCAT-AP into their own data space. So that's why you can always contact us and say, first of all, in the chat we have posted some useful material that you can consult. There's also the CEMIC Support Center that provides also useful information to what you can find what CEMIC in general provides as a useful material, and you can always contact us in order to discuss. It was the case of Peter about the mobility data space to contact and have a first touch point to answer questions about the DCAT-AP. Looking also on the going back to the 4th level of support that we have already explained during this presentation. I don't know, and with this I would like first of all to thank the team for all the preparation. I would like also to thank all the presenters, the people that are presented, and we are there to help along with DSSC. We wanted to stress that it is a common effort along with CEMIC with the DSSC, and to address any concerns that you may have via GitHub or email. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Good afternoon.
Thank you.